It's a pleasure to finally be here with you this evening to actually have results. I was thinking about this when I sent up the PowerPoint. We started talking about this back when the Wild were losing in the playoffs last season, and now they've already started this season. But we finally have results, and you know what? We have a lot of good results for you, a lot of positive changes you're going to see. And this time we have the luxury of history too, being able to go back and look at 2011 to 2018. Now, that is an interim 7-year time period, so we can't say that the line necessarily is a straight line between two data points. It might have squiggled in between, but a lot of positive changes we're going to see. And then also, in addition, we have a lot of positive comparative data. And when I talk about the comparative data, I'm going to be talking about, we keep a database over the past 2 years of communities across the metro area, so I'll be making comparisons when I speak to that. But just to refresh for everybody what we undertook for the community.
You can hear it ding.
Here's your sign. We spoke with 400 randomly selected residents across the city. The interviews were done back in August. The average interview time for a respondent was 24 minutes. We had 7% stay on the phone with us for over an hour. That is by their own choice. They have a lot to offer, a lot of additional information, and our phoners are trained not to be rude. You listen and talk and develop a relationship with a person. You really have to talk with them for about 120 questions. The non-response rate, once we found them at home during the summer, was 5%. We did set up over 50% via appointment, so that when our phoners call, it's not okay if it's not convenient for you right now, you're done. When is it convenient for you? That's why our field work is always longer. Some survey companies do it in 2 or 3 nights, and if you can't take the survey, you can't take the survey, and they'll replace you. We don't do that. And so the overall results are projectable to within plus or minus 5% in 95 out of 100 cases. So I thought I'd put up the city demographics for you first, just to show the sampling. And in looking at updated census information, I feel very good about the sample that we have being within the margin of error on critical pieces of the census, such as senior households, households with children, owner rent, those sorts of things. The longevity in the community, the city actually spikes on both ends. You have 30% that had been here for less than 5 years, and you have 31% that have been here for more than 20 years, and then 20% in each of the groups in the middle. In senior households, we're 26% of the sample. Households containing school-aged children or preschoolers, we're 26%. Home ownership, 65% of the community indicated that was the case, 35% renter. 6% said they owned or managed a business in the city. 20% said they work in the city of Little Canada. On the financial situation, we asked a 4-part scale. It's not based on income, it's about income versus expenses and having them tell us. The community was about 2 to 1 financially comfortable to financially stressed at this point in time. And you can see the quadrants looking at 35% in the northeast, 17% in the northwest, 16% in the southeast, and 32% in the southwest quadrant. Now, continuing on the age of the respondent, pretty equal distribution, about 20% in each of the age groups. The community tips to just short of college graduate as far as education. 23% were high school graduates or less, 32% some college experience, and 46% were college graduate or postgraduate. We asked ethnicity this time. 70% were white, 8% African American, 6% Hispanic Latino, 10% Asian American, and we have the gender difference of 2%, more women than men, and that is intentional. That is one thing that you do in the survey world is you have to guarantee that you have an equal balance. And we do that by asking for the person whose birthday is nearest to the date we're calling. Because if we just talk to whoever answers the phone, it would be 70% women.
Right.
Women answer the phone in Minnesota. We call it the honey while you're up factor. And so we just simply, and birthdays have no bias. It's a
Right.
nice, safe way. My mother-in-law a few years ago had somebody call and ask her for the man of the house. That person did not get far. And that's just, I said, that's not the right way to do this. Those are the overall demographics of the community. The first question we ask before we really get into any sort of topics with folks is the overall rating of the quality of life. Not a statistically significant increase, but the excellent went from 38 to 40. Overall favorable is 96%. Only 4% said only fair, nobody said poor this time. Now, most people live in a community that they're going to rate 90 to 95% excellent or good. What differentiates communities is the amount of enthusiasm, the excellent rating. Minnesota's are difficult graders. So the norm on the excellent rating across Minnesota right now is 22% excellent. So you're running about 2 times higher. You're a bump up in the history of 2011. So the 40% rating is very strong. It would place you in the top quartile of cities across the metro area. Now, what do folks like most about living in the city? And you have a split here. You have basically half the residents are attaching themselves to, shall we say, suburban amenities. It's the location. It's the closeness to family and friends, to work, those sorts of things. But you also have a small town feel that people are reacting to. Quiet and peaceful, friendly people, small town feel, open space and nature. So the community really does split. Even in the middle of suburbia here, about half the community is pointing to values that they feel that Little Canada provides in the small town aspect. Now, if we ask what they like most, we always follow up with what's the most serious issue. And keeping in mind that this question and the previous one are open-ended, so they can tell us anything, and then we collapse them into categories. What we look for first is, does anything hit 25%? Where 1 in 4 residents are focusing in an open-ended and coalescing around one response. That's a major concern in a community. You don't have anything that reaches that threshold. You actually only have one item that reaches double digits, and that's rising crime at 14%. Everything else falls to single digits. Now, on crime, it's a little bit below the norm. The norm on that is between 17 and 21% right now. So it's in line with what we see in the metro area. On taxes, you're about half of what we typically see. The norm on taxes right now is 15 to 20%. And we're going to go into taxes a little bit more specifically later on. But then everything else falls off to single digits. At the bottom, you have 23% that said they couldn't think of anything. It's not that there's nothing that's wrong, but nothing seems that, you're a booster. They don't want to say it's utopia. You actually have 13% that say there are absolutely no problems here. 1 in 8 of residents. Norm on that right now is 8%. So you're about 50% higher on that booster core. And those folks are positive throughout the survey, whether we're talking about communications, governance, staff, or anything. So it's a very strong base of boosters. What's the overall direction of the city then? The strong endorsement. 92% say you're going in the right direction. Only 5% on the wrong track. The normal on the wrong track across the metro area is 15%. I typically can find 10% on any question to disagree with, and that's not even the case here. Only 5% on the wrong track. Now, kind of validating the quality of life and why people feel so strongly about the city of Little Canada here, if you think back to the like most chart, a lot of those people are valuing small town values. Well, one of the key aspects in a small town attribute is the sense of community. And the sense of community here is extraordinarily strong amongst the residents. 88% rated either very strong or somewhat strong, only 10% not to or not at all. The key difference on this, though, is the very strong. In the suburban metro area right now, the very strong is at 15%. So you're more than double the people saying very strong on the sense of community here. Now, what's their closest connection? It's still their neighborhood, and we see this across the metro area. 48% indicate their closest connection is to their neighborhood, but 29% indicate it's the city as a whole. 12%, they tend to be parents to the school district. So it's a typical balkanization, we call it, maybe not as pronounced as we typically see that, where neighborhood is at the 55 to 60% level. But still, that's what people feel the closest connection to. What needs to be fixed or improved in the city? There's nothing that you can point to and say, this is what would make a lot of residents happy here. You have a lot of things that you'd be fine-tuning the dials on. This, once again, is open-ended. And so you don't have double-digit responses on any aspect. What leads the list? Improved pedestrian safety at 7% and improved street maintenance at 7%. You can see 24% down at the bottom, kind of building on the booster core, saying, there's nothing that needs to be fixed or improved. But if you go down that list, realize that there's no call to action on anything from residents at this point in time. What's currently missing? Well, 16%, we hit double digits on this open-ended, saying more retail. But then once again, everything else falls down to single digits, and 43% of people tell us absolutely nothing. So between fixing and improving and bringing in, or what's missing, there's no obvious aspect. You're just going to improve on the edges if you go down the list and use it for guidance as you prioritize for future action. Now, community characteristics. We go through this list, and this is set up as a stoplight. Red means stop, the city has enough. Green means go, bring more in, and yellow means you have about the right amount. As a whole, it's a sea of yellow. The community overall feels that you have about the right amount on all of these aspects. If we look, and I always tell clients, look at the difference between the red and the green, and it kind of gives you that indication. So on affordable rental apartments, that's what leads the list, is folks saying that you have too many or too much at 18%. But you have 20% saying you don't have enough. So it's a +2. It nets out. On luxury rental apartments, it's a +6. On higher cost housing, it's actually a -1. Condominiums and townhouses, +2. Starter homes, +24. On assisted living for seniors, +13. One-level housing for seniors, +17. On those, especially the starter homes, there was a lot of discussion, especially amongst those folks that stayed on the phone with us longer, talking about life cycle housing. They like living in the community. They love 40% rating at excellent. When you get ratings like that, the concern becomes, how are my children going to be able to come to the community if they go off to college and come back? Can they afford it? And that's where the call for the starter homes. On the flip side, on the assisted living and the one-level housing for seniors, if I want to retire and downsize, is there a place for me to go and not have to move out of the community? On service, retail, entertainment establishments, and dining establishments, it nets out right about a +24, about +24, +25. So there's more folks saying, well, 1 in 4, and it was very consistent. When I did the chart, I looked at, went into the data, and basically, if you said there wasn't enough service and retail, you then said there wasn't enough entertainment and there wasn't a dining establishment. So it was almost a 1-for-1. That 25% wanted expansion in all 3 of those areas. So when we do an open-ended question and ask folks, okay, what development would you most like to see in the community? It was interesting to us that the affordable dining led the list. Now, it's only leads the list at 13, or affordable housing leads the list. It's only at 13%. Affordable dining,
That'd be nice.
look up and down. Dining's next at 10%. But the affordable housing, typically what happens is people are talking about retail and dining establishments is what they'd most like to see in a community, but that harkens back to that affordable, that starter home aspect for their kids to move back into the community. And you can see, once again, you're just fine-tuning the dial. There's no hue and cry. You have 23% that are settlers. They're good, no more growth. But then if we go to the next chart, the pro-growth people outpace the anti-growth people. Is there a development you would strongly oppose? 35% said there's absolutely nothing I wouldn't oppose. What are there any things that they would oppose at a higher level? Once again, only one thing hits double digits, and that's low-income housing. There's a difference in people's minds between affordable housing and low-income housing. It's semantics oftentimes for people, but they differentiate. And then you have everything down the list from townhouses to adult entertainment to big box retail coming into Little Canada. Now, would folks support financial incentives to attract development? They would. 61% indicate they support, 32% oppose. On policy issues, I always tell clients, look at those in the intense positions to get a feel overall. And it's even on strong support at 12% and strong opposition at 11%. But there is a clear majority of folks out there when posited this question at 61% saying they would support financial incentives to attract development. Switching over to code enforcement. Would they support a more active code enforcement? Yes, the community would. 59% would support, 38% would oppose on a policy issue, a little bit more towards the strongly support versus the strong opposition. Now, when you see that sort of thing, you'd say, okay, there's a reason people want a more active code enforcement. So, but when we ask them the condition and appearance of their neighborhood, it's a strong endorsement. It's almost like they want to be proactive so that everything's really good and we want to keep it that way, because you have 89% rating the appearance of the neighborhood as excellent or good, only 11% only fair or poor. So then when we go into the specifics on code enforcement, and once again, this is set up like the stoplight, is there something glaring that people are pointing to? And there really isn't. Yard maintenance leads the list in saying code enforcement is not tough enough, but it's only 21%. When we ask this question in other cities on a threshold, we always say if it's 30% or higher, you have a real concern. So going back to the endorsement a few slides ago of a more active code enforcement, it doesn't seem like they're necessarily saying that it's needed in order to fix a current problem. They're more concerned about it preventing perhaps future issues. Now, city service ratings. Overall, we're looking for a sea of blue instead of a red riptide, and we have an incredible sea of blue. If we normalize this, and by normalizing I mean take out the unsure and the percent then positive to negative, you're among the highest that we have. And the key on it is you only have one that reaches double digits as a negative rating. Street repair and maintenance. That leads the list for every community for negative on street repair and maintenance. The critical piece, though, for your rating is the norm on this is 60% favorable to 40% negative. You at 88% positive to 11% negative are the highest we have over the last 3 years. So whatever street repair maintenance have been done through the community, we would consider it to be best practices in comparison to the rest of the metro area.
We're gonna assume the 11% is the county roads.
Yeah.
Well, we do tell them not to think about county roads and
Yeah,
specify them,
I saw
but
it.
it's oftentimes hard for folks.
Right.
we go through the list of city services again and just ask them importance, just to give you a hierarchy of city services for folks and their attitudes and opinions. Now, I've arrayed this, it was a four-part response pattern. They could say it's absolutely essential. They could say it was very important, somewhat important, or not too important. What I've arrayed here is essential and very important, because you can see at least every service was rated at least very important by more than half. The lowest rated was deer and geese management at 53%, saying it's at least very important. So I've only arrayed those two categories. And then for the hierarchy, I established it on the essential to give you a clear sense of priority. So not surprising, fire response, 80% absolutely essential. Police protection, 78% absolutely essential. Street snow plowing, 71. Then we go down to the mid-50s to 60s and right down the list. So the key takeaway, though, and oftentimes cities will look back at the previous chart for ratings, and if there's an issue where you have a service that residents have deemed absolutely essential and you have lower ratings, that's a concern to flag for the council. You have such high ratings on services overall. This is just meant, I think, to give you an idea of the hierarchy if it ever does come down to cost or budget planning, what have you. Now, a big change. In 2011 on finances, if you recall, was probably right at the peak of the recession. And you had a very typical response in 2011 on the question, would you support a property tax increase to maintain city services? Only 30% favored it in 2011. Now, 73% favor that. That's actually higher. The norm on this question right now is 65%. You almost have almost 3/4 of people saying, yes, I'm willing to invest more taxes in order to maintain the services we have. However, would you support a property tax to improve or enhance services? No, I'm not willing to do that. 24% favor, 67% oppose. So the maintenance is fine, the improvement and enhancement, not so much. On the flip side, would they support service cuts to reduce property taxes? Very little change from 2011. Now 27% would favor that, 66% would oppose, and 8% are unsure on it. So the overall property tax rating, when we asked them on a scale of very high, somewhat high, about average, somewhat low, and very low, nobody said very low. It was offered to respondents. It nets out at 30% in the high category, 54% about average, and 2% low, and 7% unsure. We would classify the city as a benign tax climate. What's a hostile tax climate? Anytime you hit 50% in the very high and the somewhat high combined, so you have more folks saying taxes are high than average, that we call a property tax hostile climate. The high on this right now is a community in northwestern Hennepin County at 77%, very high and somewhat high. That's a very difficult property tax environment. So you do have a benign tax climate, and that you kind of understand then why 3/4 are willing to invest to maintain. But then the hesitancy comes in on improving, enhancing, maybe a step too far. So the key question to me on our surveys with cities is the overall where the rubber hits the road. When you consider the property taxes you pay and the services you receive, how do you rate that value? In 2011, 80% rated the value positively. In 2018, 90% rate that value positively. Now keep in mind, you did have, in the previous chart, 38% rate their taxes as high. But you only had 8% rate the value as only fair. Nobody said poor. So even if they thought their taxes were high, the net value of the services being provided by the City of Little Canada nets out positively in folks' mind. Turning to public safety, and if you remember back, that led the list. It was below the norm as the most serious issue, but there's been a large change on this question. Do they feel that there are unsafe areas in the city? 2011, 46% said yes, there were. This time around, it was cut by more than half to 20%. If we followed up with the 20% and asked what areas did they think were unsafe, I've put that on the chart. Now, keeping in mind that those percents are of the 20%. So the 29% of 20%, so about 3% of people, or 6% of people said along Rice Street. Trails at 13%, busy intersections at 11, and everywhere at 10. So there's no real area that you can say this is a problem area in the minds of residents, but the key takeaway on this chart is the clear drop in people concerned about an unsafe area in the city. Now, on public...
Question?
Oh, sure, go ahead.
Do you have any insight as to why that changes so dramatically for us? Is this sort of, people answer maybe how they're feeling with the economy, or does that impact their decisions here, or?
This one I wouldn't link to the economy. It would be curious, I think, to look back to police statistics back in 2011 compared to 2018. We also do know that public safety is an issue that crosses borders easily. So it might not even have been something back in 2011 that put it at 46%. It could have been something happening amongst the neighbors. It really is a more macro issue. It's not a financial issue. But whatever the concern was then, and that 46% when I was here in 2011, that was high. The 20% on your position in the metro area, because this also goes by rings as you come out from the Minneapolis and St. Paul, is right at the norm of 1 in 5 folks. So if we go through a list and ask for their specific public safety concern, there was a drop in the none of the above at the bottom of the chart from 2011. Where did those folks go? They went to traffic speeding. In 2011, 4% indicated that that was the most serious public safety concern. It now leads the list at 22%. Everything else stayed right about the same. Residential crimes dropped by 6%, youth crimes went up by 2%, drugs went up by 2%, but the biggest chunk was on traffic speeding in the community. Their overall perception of crime during the past 5 years, and this might feed into a little bit the perception from 2011 with your question on the unsafe areas. 34% thought crime had increased in 2011. That dropped statistically significantly down to 26% this time. And 66% said it remained about the same. Finally, on public safety, with a concern on traffic speeding, having the big jump, I actually expected this to go up the not enough, but it remained stable. It actually is a mirror image from 2011, except 1% actually said there's too much patrolling, which means they got pulled over recently. But the 1 in 4 saying not enough is at the metro area norm. There's 25% in any community in the entire metro area that if the police drove by every hour, they would still say not enough. So it's right at the norm. So even though that increase in traffic speeding appeared, it's not necessarily an issue of lack of patrols in the minds of residents. Turning to Park and Rec. Do the current facilities meet the needs of their household? Still, 9 out of 10 say yes, they do. Little bit of an uptick in those saying no, but it's still only 9% saying no, they do not. Do the current programs meet the needs of their household? A little bit of an uptick on that from 2% to 8% saying no, but still meeting the needs of 9 out of 10 residents at this point in time. Use of trails has gone up very statistically significantly. Frequent users jumped 14% to 33%, occasionally jumped 5%, rarely jump 5%, and those that said they never are minuscule. So even those that said they never did are at least getting out and walking every once in a while on trails. Your trails are very well used, especially when we look at the demographics of the community and the households containing seniors at 26%. Now, do they think that there's a need for more meeting space in the community? This need hasn't reached residents in their minds at this point in time. Only 20% indicate that they think there's a need. 70% say no. If you look at a policy issue, strong yes versus strong no, it's 4-1 more people saying strongly no than saying strongly yes. Similarly, on an outdoor community gathering space, 26% indicate the community needs that, but 69% say they don't. This says that Little Canada doesn't need it. It's a 2-1 as a policy issue on the strong yes versus strong no. So there's not a lot of demand or perceived need out in the minds of the community at this point in time on these two items. If they heard the community was going to have a bond referendum for parks, trails, and I believe the other word we used was playground equipment, what would be a reasonable tax increase? And this is our let's make a deal question. Our phoners pick a random starting point and move up and down the scale depending on what the respondent says. First off, you have 31% that say nothing. As I mentioned earlier with the Roseville School District here, we work on, I've been doing this 25 years. I worked on hundreds of referendums. The norm, nothing, for any referendum is anytime it's between 30 and 35%, it's completely manageable. That's as core opposition, that's to be expected. If you go then down and establish a median on this scale, it's about $4 to $5 a month is what the average property tax increase residents would tolerate. Now, is that number set in stone? It absolutely is not set in stone because the devil's in the details. What's included and everything like that. Going to Roseville, there were aspects of that as a starting number on that bond referendum that the number was lower, but they had such compelling components that people wanted, the safety and security and everything, people would support more. So it's not set in stone, it's just meant to give you an indication of where folks think is a reasonable starting point for a discussion. Finally, communications. 88% rate communications from the city positively, only 11% only fair. Norm for excellent and good on this across the metro area right now is 74%. So you're running about 14 points higher than the norm. On residential input, the chart on the left, the city does a good job seeking input from residents. 78% said yes, 17% said no, and 5% were unsure. That's outstanding. Norm on that right now is 65%. On the right-hand pie chart, other than voting, do you feel if you wanted to, you could have a say about the way city runs things? 72% said yes, 23% said no. Norm on that is 60% agreement, 35% of people saying no. So kind of the pie chart on the left is asking, do they have the ability to say what they want? And the pie chart on the right is saying, do they have the ability to be heard? And perhaps not only have a say, but perhaps have their way. There's not that disconnect where some communities have. Yes.
Did any of the respondents for the no areas in either of these two charts give indications as to why they felt that way?
We did not follow up on this one. Sometimes communities, the common theme on, especially the right-hand chart, the right-hand pie chart, there tends to be two prominent groups in there. There's a group that says, I don't want to have a say. I vote every 2 to 4 years, depending on the election cycle. Don't bother me outside of that. Then you have the group that is that disconnect, where you could have 7 city town hall meetings, give them an opportunity to have a voice, but if you don't do what they ask, they didn't have the ability to have a say. So that's why I always differentiate. I oftentimes want to just ask, could you have a say or did you not get your way? Which one was it? Because that theme comes through oftentimes, but there doesn't seem to be that disconnect here like there is in other communities. Where are folks getting their information? The dark bronze color bar on this chart is their primary source of information. This is open-ended. The yellow is how they would prefer to receive information, and pretty much how they're getting it matches up with how they would prefer to receive it. The city newsletter leads the list at 39%, the city website at 25%, then the local newspaper at 11%, social media at 9%. Really, the only thing that differentiates on how they would prefer is an increase in email and specific mailings in the yellow bar. But pretty much where folks are getting their information is how they would prefer. They're meeting their needs on communications. The Roseville Little Canada Review, 23% indicate they did not receive it. 60% said they receive it and read it, and 17% said they receive it and don't read it. So it's about 6 out of 10 residents are actually reading Little Canada Roseville Review. Les Petites Canadiennes, 76% reported receiving the newsletter. 93%, if you get it in their hands, they're reading it, regularly read it. Now, the 76% that report receiving the email, that varies so much depending on the amount of rental, because rental becomes a difficulty sometimes for getting newsletters into folks' hands, and there's also a transient nature to rental where they might not necessarily read the city newsletter, but 93% of the 76%, so 70% of people in the community are reading the newsletter. How effective is it for keeping them informed about activities in the city? Extraordinarily so. 90% said very or somewhat effective. Almost a flat majority said very effective. And we told them it was published, I believe, 6 times a year. And we asked, I think I could pull out the survey, and asked them, was that the right number of times? 72% indicated yes, that was perfect, that met the needs of their household. 25% would like it more often. 1% less often, and 2% were unsure. So maybe a little bit, a couple more issues a year to mitigate the 25%, but you are meeting the needs of 3/4 of people. Cable television, 51% indicated they report subscribing to cable television services. And we asked them frequent, occasional, rarely or never viewership on 3 channels. I believe channel 16 was the city council meetings. I'm pleased to tell you that more than your spouses are watching. 21% is actually very good. Norm on viewership of city council meetings right now is about 10% frequently and occasionally. So folks are watching. The city website, and we told them that it had just been updated in May. And so we asked specifically, have you visited the new website, to kind of differentiate that. 50% have report accessing the new website. How do they rate the content? Extraordinarily high. 99% rate the content favorably. The ease of navigating and finding information, 97%. And that's what trips up community after community. If there's a chink in an armor on a website, it's people finding what they need. So the redesign we would consider a best practice for getting residents the content and the ease of finding the information. Were they aware that there were web stream meetings available on the website, and have they watched? 40% were not aware of that. 30% indicated that they were aware and watched, and 30% indicated they were aware and had not watched. Were they aware of Notify Me? 77% indicated that they were aware, 23% were not aware. And then finally, social media. This is a 2-part question. What's arrayed here is the second part of the question. First off, we asked, do you or members of your household use this social media? And then if they use it, how likely would you be to use it to get information from the city of Little Canada? So the dark purple bar are those that would use it to get information from the city. The light The pink bar are those that use it but would not use it. The bar combined is the total reach. So 71% of the community uses Facebook. 56% would use Facebook to gather information about the city. YouTube is second at 62%, with 41% would use it to get information from the city. Then we go down to Twitter, and this is a typical decline we've seen over the last couple of years of using Twitter as a source of information on government. And I'll leave it at that if you think what's happened over the last 2 years. And then Instagram, followed by Nextdoor. So those are all the charts. I mean, I think overall, a real strong endorsement of what's gone on in the interim of 7 years here. Folks feel really good about the community as a whole. They feel very strong about services, and overall, they're willing to invest in those services in order to maintain them for the future. So I would be happy to answer any questions you have.
Well, first, thank you. This is very, very good information. I know for me, I suspect for all of us that it does a couple things. It confirms that, yeah, we're kind of doing the right thing, going in the right direction, and that the residents really appreciate a lot of it. So in my mind, this is great news.
Wonderful.
How would you rank us just across? I mean, you said it a few times, but just overall, with all the questions you asked and everything that's going on in communities, how do you see us comparable maybe to, like we live in the northeast area compared to southeast area, northwest, southwest area?
As a whole, this would be, I mean, and we will run it in the report to kind of give you an aggregate score, essentially. Easily within the top 15% amongst the top 10% of communities. So you're talking top 6, 7. Some of the scores, I mean, the overall rating at city services is extraordinarily high. The excellent rating at 40% is very high, like I talked about, but there are those communities on the west side of the metro area that it's in their welcome wagon, that we live in an excellent community with excellent schools and maintain the excellence. So the excellent rating is at 72%, not surprisingly. So you have those variants, but as a whole, when you look at communications, you look at, you have the benefit here of a more benign tax climate than a lot of other metro area cities with that 38%. So, right around the top 10% as a whole would be an estimate.
Thank you.
When you do the comparisons, do you take into consideration size of Little Canada versus size of other cities?
We tend to, for the overall, no. I mean, there's really no, but like I mentioned on trail usage, you have to include demographics into those, park and rec, those kind of factors. When you're looking at public safety and crime, like I mentioned, location matters also. So on some of those things, absolutely comes in and impacts the overall rating itself. But on quality of life, that really doesn't have an impact necessarily so much on demographics or location.
Okay.
And you said you're going to produce a more comprehensive report with
Yeah,
additional
there'll be
crosstabs.
there'll be a summary of findings and then a big thick book of crosstabs.
Will we have the opportunity to review anonymized feedback from residents, like the comments, the commentary that they provided, maybe didn't necessarily end up in a bucket on the list, or that you had categorized?
If there are any key sidebar comments, we will include those in the report if they're of interest. Kind of insightful is kind of the line we draw, because it's not necessarily something that we can disaggregate into, okay, 2% feel this way or anything like that. But if there's anything that, rises to the level of an interesting point in a focus group that the client should be aware of, we include that comment, absolutely.
I guess I'm trying to figure out how we could disseminate a lot of this information, perhaps on a link on our website. would you guys have any, like, I mean, somewhat of, I could perhaps put this presentation on a website, but I don't know if everybody would understand it in the manner in which you presented it.
I've seen clients do everything from, link the PowerPoint to the report that we provide. They'd provide a link of the presentation because the data needs context. I mean, if you
Exactly.
come in at 55%. So I think a lot of clients now provide a link to the presentation. And some clients have had me come in and do a special recording just to accompany a PowerPoint presentation.
We could put a cut of this portion of the meeting on the
Yeah.
city website.
Could that
And
too.
we should put it in the newsletter.
So we could do that too.
Yeah, that's how they'd prefer to receive it.
Right.
And for 7%, send them an email.
Yeah, right.
Fashion.
Other questions? Well, again, thank you very much. This is very informative, good information, and again, thank you
It
for
was
all
a
your
pleasure.
work.
Thank
Maybe
you.
we'll see you again in another 5 or 6 or so.
Sounds good.